Hi, thanks for joining us today. This is Miles to Go, and today we're going to be working on the going away to college presentation. Now, here's the problem with this presentation. Because of the nature of the work that we do, substance abuse education, and going off to college as the topic, this is a really negative presentation by nature. Because that's my job, is this is kind of a warning video about the half a dozen speed bumps that you want to avoid when you get to your freshman year of college in order to have a successful experience. Please don't see this as definitive of you or your experience. This isn't what we think is going to happen to you. This is kind of something we're trying to warn you away from or steer you around. The time frame for the presentation is what's left of your senior year. Now, you might be seeing this when you're doing applications, and so we're going to talk a little bit about that. You might be seeing this the last week before you graduate. And so each of you will come at this from a different perspective, but generally speaking, what's left of your senior year, the summer before college, and then the first semester of your freshman year when you get to school. This will be in two sections, okay? Part one will be the stresses you encounter during the months leading up to college, and part two, the inappropriate ways that some people choose to deal with that stress. So the first stress that the people typically go through for college, other than having to complete high school, is having to go through the application process. And the application process is, while it's onerous and relatively boring, it can also be extraordinarily challenging for some people, especially depending upon what university or college you choose to go to. Some of the essay prompts are they border on insane. Lehigh University, for example, has one that says, if your name were an acronym, what would it stand for, and how would it reflect your strengths and personality? That's great. If your name's Amy, you're animated and ambitious, and you're motivated, and you're yearning for knowledge. But if your name's Bartholomew, by the time you finish your acronym essay, you've missed the application deadline. So that's a little bit problematic depending on what name you were given when you were born. The second one is from the University of Chicago, and it says, Winston Churchill believed a joke is a very serious thing. Tell us your favorite joke and try to explain the joke without ruining it. Well, that's harder than it sounds, but my favorite one comes again from the University of Chicago. And this one, just part of the essay prompt is this. Your work must include at least four of the following elements: a paper airplane, a transformation, a shoe, the invisible hand, two doors, pointillism, a fanciful explanation of the Pythagorean theorem, a ventriloquist or ventriloquism, the periodic table of the elements, the concept of Xiong, and number two pencils. And while if you're a member of an improv troupe, that might sound like a really interesting challenge, and you may relish the opportunity to explore those ideas, if you're a regular person, that's a really daunting task. And so the first stress you're going to run into is the application process. The second stress that a lot of college applicants go through is the idea of, will I get in? Because acceptance rates, while they vary from year to year, they're pretty tough right now. Some acceptance rates, like for instance, Stanford is number 2 on the 2020 list of hardest schools to get into at 4.8%. Harvard is next at 5.4. Yale comes in at 5th at 6.3%. Columbia is in there at 6.8. MIT is at 7.9. Caltech is 8.1. Brown is 9.3. And so that means basically at the bottom of the first page of the hardest colleges to get into, less than 10% of the people get in. For every 10 applicants, 9 will be rejected. And all of them probably, because they're applying to that university, feel as though they have the opportunity and the resume to get in. They probably all deserve to go there, but they won't be chosen. For whatever reason, none of which will be known to you, the acceptance committee at that school will let certain people in and others not. And so it's really kind of a capricious, really hard to predict process wherein you bare your soul to a stranger and they choose to accept you or not accept you, and you'll never know the reason why you were rejected. Well, that's stressful. There's some important transition points here that you're going to go through. Let's look at a couple of the transition points that you'll be looking at. And I thank Norwich University in Vermont for giving me the outline for this kind of stress point outline. The first one is the summer transition. Stage 1 is the summer transition. High school is over. You may be filled with a mix of satisfaction and nostalgia. Romances intensify, especially when viewed through the lens of a possible impending separation. College can seem like a movie you're about to star in. While your departure date is still a distant reality, there are a few things to watch out for. First of all, don't end relationships and activities early as a way of reducing pain of separation by dealing with it in advance. Unfortunately, by doing this, you can inadvertently be cutting off support systems and missing out on a lot of fun unnecessarily. Second challenge here in the summer of transition is flaunting parental authority. It can be hard to say goodbye, and you may not have the words necessary to thank your parents for all they've done for you and all they've sacrificed to get you where you are today. You realize that you're about to be off on your own, acting like an adult, and you may chafe at your parents' attempts to enforce curfews and control your activities. That's understandable. And yet at the same time, like drinking excessively and flaunting parental authority are really problematic transitions during the summer. And the third one, which I already kind of mentioned here, is drinking and smoking weed. There's a lot of parties to go to, and that isn't always a good thing. Partying heavily now, you may be setting up a pattern of use that predicts very bad outcomes in the coming freshman year of college. Second stage of the transitions is separation anxiety. Summer's winding down. You come to the realization that you really are going off to college. You may feel some self-doubt, a little fear or trepidation over the upcoming departure. Many students worry about being judged if they express any of those concerns, so they may bottle these anxieties up and keep them to themselves. If they could just share them with others honestly, though, they would find that just about everybody feels the same way. Separation anxiety, in fact, may well be the biggest issue many college students face, and yet it remains one of the least discussed challenges of all. One of our friends in the industry that we work in, we've met him a number of times, is the author and the psychologist Michael Thompson. He comes from back east, but he comes out to the West Coast where we live often to speak and present. And when we hear him speak, we find that he's really quite informed and really on point when he talks about this kind of separation anxiety. And he says here, what's really going on is the most important and difficult transition in all of life, the end of childhood and the late adolescent separation and individuation from parents. To separate after a profoundly close relationship of 18 years is a significant loss for both parent and child. The loss may not be permanent. College may turn out to be only a temporary interruption in a close lifelong relationship. Once that separation has begun, though, neither party can predict how close or how distant the relationship between them will be after the transition to college is completed. There's a feeling in both parties, often unarticulated or denied, that this could be it. This could be the end. The launching of a child stirs up everyone in the family. For the parents, it's the culmination of their child rearing, the end of their parental curriculum. From now on, if they act as parents for their college age or older child, it will be by invitation only. The separation process for parents has many rough facets. Along with the ending of their role as parents, other psychological stresses may be at work. The departure of a child means that they have to face, and this is always true when the last child leaves home, the viability of their marriage. Perhaps the children have been the pillars that propped up the marriage. The parents may be lonely. Perhaps their careers are not so fulfilling, and the day-to-day responsibility for children has been what has been giving their lives meaning. The departure for college precipitates the empty nest syndrome. The separation of late adolescent children from their parents may have the impact of divorce or death without anyone ever articulating the loss and grief that they are feeling. That's amazingly profound stuff, and that can be really hard to deal with for both the kid and the parents. And so we have to realize how this separation anxiety is a really big deal, and sometimes because we don't talk about it or think about it a lot, it creeps up and surprises us, and that's the thing we're trying to avoid here. The stage 3 in the transition process is the first term of your freshman year. Freshman academic program can generate severe stress. The courses you take in your first term have a strong influence on how your first year goes. You should avoid taking too many courses or courses that are too advanced. Listen to your academic advisors about the course load and levels that are appropriate for an entering freshman. Other challenges you may meet in the first term. First of all, when you get there, you have to meet your roommates. And that can be a really tough time. That can be problematic because roommates can be great, but they can also be really troubling. Some other colleges, though, I suspect that what they may be doing is actually pitting you against your diametric opposite. If you're a neat freak, they stick you with Pigpen. It can be really troubling. It can be really trying. And I hope the best for you. I really do. I hope it works out really well. And yet sometimes college roommates can be a real task, a real trial. The other thing you have to navigate here is campus bureaucracy. A lot of schools have very entrenched bureaucracies, and it's hard to get yourself inserted into a smooth groove here. And so it's going to be a little rocky at first, figuring out how to drop classes, perhaps, figuring out how to do extracurricular activities. It can be a little troubling there too. Social expectations are problematic here because you go to college again with that kind of picture in your head of what it's going to be like. And oftentimes it's a little more lonely than you think it is in the beginning. And the other thing you have to navigate here is the rules of the new culture, especially things like unwritten dress codes and conduct codes, because when you travel outside, like we're in California, I've been here for over 20 years, but I come from New England. And there's a lot of differences between the New England states and things that are considered normal behaviors there and things that are considered normal behaviors in California. And if you're a fish out of water, it can really be troubling and it can be problematic and it can be stressful. Stage 4 in the transition off to college is when you get there, a lot of students feel like they have a honeymoon, like there's an opportunity to just relax a bit and get into college. There's no parents, no teachers and counselors are watching you in the halls. Cinematic images of college freedom run through your head, frat parties and downtown bars galore. Unfortunately, the temptation and pressure to participate in activities that may be counterproductive here or harmful or illegal is huge in the first weeks of college. Remember, though, mistakes in judgment made here can adversely affect your entire college career. Stage 5, the end of the honeymoon, because the realization dawns that much of college consists of hard work coupled with frustration and disappointment. Nothing's going to prepare freshmen for the shock of those first papers and quiz grades because they're almost always lower than the grades they received in high school. It can be particularly difficult for students who coasted through high school. Now they find themselves working a lot harder, but receiving a lot lower grades. Freshmen are often simply bowled over by the reading and writing assignments that they get in their freshman year of college. Homesickness is also a really big issue at first, and since it's not cool to be homesick, most students never voice their discomfort or seek help with it. Stage 6, the grass is always greener. Many students who struggle in their first year of school find themselves fantasizing about transferring. This can be especially strong for students who are initially conflicted about what school they wanted to attend. Transferring is the equivalent, me being a recovering drug addict and alcoholic, in Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. When you move to a new location trying to fix the problems you're experiencing currently, that's called a geographic cure. In other words, give it at least a year before you seriously consider transferring. If it happens that you are in the wrong school, then transferring is a legitimate solution. If, however, the problem is innate, the only viable solution to fix how you're dealing with college is to deal with you and how you're dealing with college. Remember, you're not unique in your struggles, but moving to a new college won't change the dynamic if the problem is internal. And so think about that a little bit before you transfer. Stage 7 in the transition, things that you have to think about: going home again for the first time. So you're going to go home for Thanksgiving, perhaps, or possibly for Christmas break. Your position in the family hierarchy may have shifted in that time frame. Younger siblings may have encroached upon your space, or your bedroom might now be your mom's Zen rock garden. And so it's a little troubling when you come home and realize that you aren't the center of the universe anymore. In fact, you may have been completely supplanted or replaced. Reunions with high school friends can have some surreal overtones because after the first term of college, reunited friends tend to exaggerate their successes and minimize their problems. Don't make the mistake of comparing your insides to other people's outsides. Stage 8, and this is a really good stage, you finally learn how to cope with college. After about 6 weeks on campus, many freshmen begin to enjoy their classes, engage in campus activities, and in general, participate more actively in the life of the campus. By the middle of the second semester, you're going to find that classes, dorm life, social activities, and studies will finally mesh into a well-integrated lifestyle. If you can just avoid freaking out, passing out, or stoning out, you'll be more likely to integrate successfully over time. Another stressor that you're going to encounter in your freshman year of college is that almost all college freshmen are required to live in dormitories. Dorm life is a given, and you can thank, I think, Princeton for that. They were the first people who pioneered mandatory dorm life. So you're going to have to live in a dorm. And one of the things you're going to have to deal with is an RA. Now, an RA is a resident advisor or resident assistant. Essentially, it's a college student just about your age who receives a stipend or some sort of remuneration for a job that they do. They're going to oversee a floor in a dorm. And their job is kind of to make sure that people are integrated smoothly and that they get along well, They deal with roommate problems, perhaps. They also are in charge of keeping the rules. And so a lot of times RAs can be either really good at that or really bad at that. I had a really bad RA. He used to do stuff like this. He'd be like, I smell weed. No, you don't. We have a towel under the door and there's a fan blowing. Oh, no, the fan's supposed to blow out, not in. So essentially, our RA wasn't really what I described him as. He wasn't a jerk. We were. And so when the RAs try to enforce the rules, please don't resent them. They're actually just doing their job. But the RA is also supposed to be there to help you transition smoothly into your first year of college. Here's the things an RA is supposed to look out for in you just in the month of September. Here are some things that they're supposed to keep an eye on and see how well you're navigating and how well you're managing. First one, homesickness. That one tends to keep coming up, doesn't it? It's really something that a lot of people don't talk a lot about, and yet it can be really troubling for a lot of people. Homesickness is a big deal. Roommate conflicts. When I was a college student in my freshman year, I was a relatively difficult roommate to put up with. I did things like puke in my roommate's closet. That was one of my famous moves. And there's others that are worse than that, which I also did, but we won't bother you with those now. I won't describe anything more, but I think puking in somebody's closet is enough of a problem to indicate that you might have some roommate conflicts, especially if you get a roommate like me. Initial academic adjustments. We already talked enough about that, I think. Values exploration is a really big deal here because in high school, I always ask all the classes when I'm working in the classroom. We're on lockdown right now. Unfortunately, we're at shelter in place for the COVID-19 virus pandemic. So it's values exploration. When I'm working in schools, I always ask my students, when you come to school every single day, do your friends expect you to behave in a particular way? And most of them are like, yeah. I'm like, if you act differently, do they call you out on it? They act away. They ask you, why are you acting so weird? I'm not. Yeah, you are. Cut it out. You're making me uncomfortable. When you get to college, you get to be anything you want. Not many people are going to know you. Maybe nobody knows you. This is literally a chance to hit reset. You can become a brand new person. You can look at life differently than you have in the past. That may mean that you go off to college a devout Christian and you come home a devout Buddhist. That's not good or bad. It just is. Values explorations are really quite stressful here. They're great, but they're stressful. New social life adjustments, it can be hard to navigate the new social waters. Initial social rejections, maybe you don't get along with everybody. You're not going to. Some people might just not like you because of your face, and that can be kind of problematic. That's hard to take. You don't understand it, but you're going to get rejected by certain people. Feelings of inadequacy can crop up. Administrative red tape is a really big deal here. In loco parentis problems, you've got a person who's basically your age telling you what to do all the time. That can be a little troubling. Campus familiarization. Depending on the school you go to, you might have a campus larger than the town you live in right now. And so when you get there, sometimes it's really hard not just to find the building that you're supposed to go into, but the class you're supposed to go into. It can be really hard. Campus familiarization can be a big deal. And the big one here, this may be one of my favorites to do in the classroom. How many of you are currently in a relationship that you want to continue when you both go off to college? Here's the problem with long distance relationships, okay? Current studies still show they're going to fail at a rate of about 85%. Most high school relationships do not survive college. And I don't want to discourage you here. If you have a relationship that you value a lot, I mean, you can text, you can tweet, you can Skype, you can FaceTime, you can do all kinds of different connections, and that may keep the relationship alive. But the problem with college is it tends to offer up a lot of new relationships, and that can be really hard to keep yourself frozen in amber relationship-wise as all of this other stuff is revolving around you. And so you have to realize that that can be problematic. Here's the thing I would beg you to do. If you find that you're in a relationship that you can't maintain, you promised that you would be exclusive, but you can't maintain that. Just be honest about it, okay? Just tell the other person that it's over. Certainly it's going to hurt their feelings, but it won't hurt their feelings as much as if you lie to them and keep them in the dark for extended periods of time. That's just irresponsible and immature. So please don't follow that path. So all of those things, that's just September. That's what the RA is supposed to watch for you. Just in September, navigating college can be really tough. There's a lot of things that you have to think about. Another stressor that you may encounter is parents' expectations. Now, here's the thing about your parents' expectations. Most of the time, they're pretty happy with what you're doing. If you think that you have to get a perfect grade point average, if you have to be big man on campus, you have to land that top internship in order for your parents to be happy, you could be causing yourself a lot of anxiety unnecessarily. It can hurt your self-esteem, and it can make it more difficult to adjust to school. Basically, a University of Central Florida study has found that students' anxieties often are based on exaggerated perceptions of what their parents need or expect. The problem is that many parents and students hold different perceptions of what the parents' expectations are. Students are often trying to meet goals that are far tougher than the ideals their parents have in mind. The study found that while most students were meeting or exceeding their expectations, their parents' expectations, many thought they were falling short. And those students reported both lower self-worth and more trouble adjusting to college. So be clear that your parents are probably happy if you're getting decent grades, if you're well socialized, and you're enjoying yourself at school. It's really important not to put too much pressure on yourself in that area. Here's a big deal, though. Here's a really big stress area that students struggle with, and oftentimes they tend to struggle with it alone. Mental health issues. These are really big deals because here's the thing. This article says the top 5 signs that your child is struggling in college. The first few months of college in particular can be tough. For many people, it's the first time outside the structure of their home. They have to learn how to manage their own schedules and take care of themselves, shop for themselves, and manage a budget. On top of that, they have also lost their usual high school support network. They have to build a new social support network from scratch. According to the American College Health Association, nearly half of all college students report feeling so depressed at some point that they have trouble functioning, and 14.9% meet the criteria for clinical depression. So it can be a really big deal. Either it's acute episodic depression or ongoing clinical long-term depressive affect. That's a problem because here's the thing. Most students with symptoms of mental illness don't seek help. A University of Michigan study indicates that more than half of students with significant symptoms of anxiety or depression don't seek help. One of the biggest indicators of whether a student sought help was socioeconomic background. Students who reported growing up in poor families were almost twice as likely to not seek help. However, poor students were also more prone to symptoms of depression and anxiety disorders. Other factors associated with not seeking help include lack of perceived need, being unaware of services or insurance coverage, skepticism about the effectiveness of those services, or being Asian or Pacific Islander. Women were more likely to realize they needed treatment and seek it, but the authors also noted that most mental disorders occur before the age of 24, and those problems often have long-term implications into adulthood. And so, exiting high school and entering college tends to be a very profound open window of opportunity for the onset or the occurrence of mental issues or mental illness. Here's the thing, though. We can concentrate on a couple of these because they are very predictive of less successful outcomes. Risks for quitting college identified. College students who consider dropping out are particularly sensitive to a handful of critical events. The critical event with the most influence was depression. Students with depression are twice as likely to drop out of college. College students with depression are twice as likely as their classmates to drop out of school. However, research indicates that a lower grade point average depends upon the type of depression the student suffers from. There are 2 core symptoms of depression: a loss of interest and pleasure in activities, or a depressed mood. The loss of interest is associated with lower grade point averages. The correlation between depression and academic performance is mainly driven by a loss of interest in activities. This is significant because it means individuals can be very depressed and very functional depending on which type of depression they have. Lots of students have significant depression. On some dimension are performing just fine, but may be at risk and go unnoticed because there's no noticeable drop in function. Students with both depression and anxiety, though, suffer especially poor academic performance. If you take a student in the 50th percentile of GPA distribution and compare them with a student who is depressed by itself, the depressed student would be around the 37th percentile, a 13% drop. However, a student who suffers from depression and anxiety plummets to the 23rd percentile, basically a 50% drop. Now, the University of Michigan, where the study was done, has a student dropout rate of under 5%, which is much lower than the national average. This probably reflects University of Michigan's support network for students experiencing emotional problems or depression. They have essentially trained student outreach intervention teams. And they look for people who are struggling and they actually help them with the struggles they are facing and help them to succeed and not drop out. Many students in the US with depression, as with the general population, remain untreated. Maybe the biggest reason that only about 50% of people with depression say they think they need help is the reason that a lot of people don't get the help that they actually need. Only half the people who need it say they think they actually need it. A lot of college students, in fact, think that this particular feeling is normal. Now, here's the problem with depression. You can have different types of depression, like we said, loss of interest or depressed affect. You can also have acute or long-term and ongoing. The thing you can possibly be tempted to do is go to what's called the DSM-5, or if later on they're going to come up with a new edition. But essentially, you look up the symptoms of depression. Here's the thing about that. You can look it up and see if you may have the idea that you could be depressed, but I don't want you diagnosing yourself, okay? If you're struggling, reach out for help and get help with that struggle. It really does matter. Anxiety disorders are even more difficult than depression to diagnose because there's so many different kinds of anxiety disorders. General anxiety disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, panic disorder, social anxiety disorder, and PTSD. And these all take very different forms. They can present differently. Please, again, I'm not trying to encourage you to self-diagnose, but if you're struggling, reach out for help. One of the reasons that I talk about PTSD as one of the anxiety disorders is a study from the University of Buffalo, which indicated this. PTSD symptoms in college students, it occurs more frequently than most of us would imagine. An estimated 9% of college students have symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder and are more likely to drink alcohol than their peers without the psychological condition. In turn, heavy alcohol consumption exacerbates their PTSD symptoms over time, prolonging a vicious cycle. Heavy drinking is common on college campuses and related to risk for sexual assault, interpersonal violence, and serious injury, any of which may trigger PTSD. This study, however, showed that alcohol use is associated with problems that are linked over time with the exacerbation of PTSD symptoms, and that PTSD symptoms show a similar effect on alcohol consumption. Each affects the other. As such, both PTSD and heavy drinking are risk factors for one another, each with implications over the course of college. In a 2011 study of 3,000 college students published in the journal Psychological Trauma, they found that 9% of students met the criteria for PTSD, with the disorder found most commonly among those exposed to sexual and physical assault, most of whom were women. That's troubling, and that's a big deal. Once again, I want to make sure we understand this last point. Please don't try to self-diagnose, but if you're struggling and find that you're uncomfortable and not succeeding at the level you thought you would be, seek out help from your campus health department. You're probably insured or covered anyway, so go seek the help that you may need. There's no stigma attached to this. There's no mark that's going to go on your permanent record that people will be able to see when you apply for a job. Reach out for the help that you may need if you're struggling. The last point in this first part that we want to talk about is the idea of how students express their stress when they get off to college. There was a man who ran the National Association of Independent Schools. His name was Pat Bassett. And Pat Bassett was doing, as a part of his role of the head of the NAIS, he was speaking to a bunch of college leaders. He was speaking to the president of Georgetown, the president of Stanford, the dean of faculty of arts and science at Harvard, the director of initiative for innovation in engineering and education at Olin College, essentially some really big heavy hitters in college education. And what he was presenting on was called the 5 C's of 21st century education: critical thinking, creativity, communication, collaboration, and character. Essentially what he was telling these high-flying administrators, we're building you students who are incredibly capable. They're going to be ready for a 21st century education. And when he finished, he said, I got some polite applause, but while agreeing that these concepts matter, the university leaders also confirmed what a professor from Harvard told me last year, that 30 to 40% of the undergraduates are taking antidepressants, and 10% of the female students suffer from eating disorders. This is particularly interesting that the students at these colleges already won the lottery by matriculating to places which were nearly impossible to get into for mere mortals, and yet so many were still so stressed and needing medication. When asked what challenge these fine colleges had that they wished primary and secondary schools would work on with them, I was hoping for, wouldn't it be nice to initiate a national conversation on the content of curriculum from preschool through college? Instead, what all the university folks agreed upon was their biggest need for coordination between schools and colleges, students coming from high school already with serious problems with alcohol. And so that'll be the transition point from the first stressor section to the second inappropriately dealing with stresses section, which will focus mostly on what we just talked about here from Pat Bessett's presentation, is alcohol. Thanks for being here. Join us in the second part. That'll be coming up in the next video.